I hit the water at 11:12 a.m., the Atlantic swallowing my scream and my name in the same cold gulp. A hand between my shoulder blades, a hiss in my ear, say hi to the sharks. And then sky turned into knives and salt. When I surfaced, the yacht was already shrinking, white and sleek and merciless, my sun's silhouette a dark notch against the sun. By the second breath I understood the truth the ocean makes simple. People either pull you in or push you out. My family had chosen their side. Let me back up to the moment I still believed blood could be thicker than seawater. I am Margaret Harrison, 67, widow of Robert Harrison, builder of a tech empire and a stubborn believer in early lapse and late forgiveness. 2 years after Robert's heart gave out, he left me with the responsibility and the fortune, and I left the big house for a condo with fewer stairs and more quiet. I had my hip replaced 6 weeks ago, and because optimism is a habit, I took my son's invitation at 9:30 a.m. on a Tuesday to mean reconciliation. Just the three of us, Mom, David had said on the phone, warm as a space heater, to toast your recovery. I put on the navy dress Robert always said matched my eyes and took a taxi to the marina, telling myself we were a family, even if the last 2 years had felt like talking through glass. The yacht was magnificent, a 42-foot confession of bad priorities. David hugged me, light and staged. Vanessa, my daughter-in-law, smiled the way a blade glints. We slid past the Massachusetts coast into water as smooth as a lie. For an hour they were pleasant. Mimosas, talk of renovations to my old Beacon Hill house, signed over to them after Robert died, a decision that now burned like a brand. Then the conversation shifted, the way a current changes without warning. David asked about my will, about the trust, about simplifying probate. Vanessa pretended to take selfies and angled her phone to catch me sipping champagne and answering questions I suddenly did not want to answer. The pieces clicked. The power of attorney they'd pushed in the hospital when I was loopy, the financial advisor who had stopped calling back, the careful mentions of my confusion. David, I said, setting my glass down, take me back to shore. The mask cracked. I'm afraid that's not going to happen, Mom, he said, voice hard. Vanessa mentioned documented memory issues. They had a folder with forms and a plan for the easy way or the hard way. I stood, hip aching but mind bright, and told them to go to hell. Vanessa stepped behind me and breathed, say hi to the sharks, and the world tipped. Cold will tell you the truth about your body. Mine remembered how to kick out of shoes, strip drag, aim for air. I broke the surface in time to watch the yacht accelerate. No panic, no rescue arc, just a decision. Then Mercy arrived with an engine sputter and a curse. Captain Jake Morrison, weathered, 60-something, the kind of man whose hands are maps of the sea, hauled me aboard with the help of his teenage grandson, Tyler. He radioed the Coast Guard. I grabbed his sleeve. Please, I said through shivering teeth, don't report me found. Not yet. Jake studied my face and recognized the shape of a larger danger. Sometimes doing right isn't the same as following rules, he said, and told the Coast Guard they'd chased debris. They took me to a hidden cove and to Mrs. Chin, 70, steel-spined, who ran a bed and breakfast on cash and discretion. Soup arrived, then dry clothes, then the reality that I was officially dead. At 3:10 p.m., wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of lemons, I opened an old laptop and read my obituary. It suggested I had declined into the fog of dementia. David was quoted about confusion. Vanessa wept to a reporter. A photo showed me at David's surprise party, blinking because no one had told me 20 strangers would be there. They were telling the story that would make my death make sense. I made a list on hotel stationery: lawyer, accountant, financial advisor, bank manager, trust officer. Anyone who could have fed my son information. Anyone who might be on the inside. Jake agreed to be my eyes at the marina. By 7:40 p.m., the plan had shape. stay dead, gather proof, and turn their performance into a confession. But rage will not sleep. At midnight, with Jake idling 3 blocks away, I slipped my old key into the back door of the Beacon Hill house I had signed over for simplicity's sake. The rooms were sheeted, the refrigerator freshly stocked, the office alive with paper. On Robert's desk lay the violence I needed to see: legal drafts, financial projections, and a typed schedule titled The Margaret Project. They had been documenting me for over a year. Coaching confusion, staging forgetful scenes, switching medications, filming my pauses, curating a dossier of decline. I took photos with a disposable camera, hands steady, heart volcanic. Then headlights powdered across the parlor and the front door opened. David and Vanessa's voices carried in. I slipped out the rear garden, past rose bushes I'd planted myself, and heard it. The thin, urgent cry of a newborn somewhere inside the house that used to be mine. I crouched in the rose garden at 12:25 a.m., breath frosting, my hands still smelling of old paper and ink. The infant's cries from inside the house knifed through my chest sharper than the cold. David and Vanessa had never mentioned children. They'd bought a yacht with money meant for a business. They'd pushed me overboard. And now there was a baby in my former home. I slipped into Jake's truck 15 minutes later, shivering for reasons that had nothing to do with the night air. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Jake said. "Worse," I told him. "I've seen my replacement." By 9 a.m. the next morning, Jake had me at the office of Danny Crawford, a private investigator Mrs. Chen trusted. Danny was in his 50s, prematurely gray, the kind of man who read rooms the way others read newspapers. I laid it all out: the push off the yacht, the forged documents, the mysterious infant. Danny listened, then flipped through the photographs I'd taken of the so-called Margaret Project. His finger tapped the initials at the bottom of one note: MT. "This handwriting looks familiar," he said. "Let me run it through databases." For a fee in cash, Danny agreed to shadow David and Vanessa. We arranged a 12-hour check-in rule. If I went silent, he'd go to the police. 2 days later, Danny spread surveillance photos across Mrs. Chen's kitchen table. My son and his wife had been meeting lawyers, visiting banks, and making repeated trips to Whitmore Reproductive Services, a discreet Boston clinic known for surrogacy. The truth landed with the weight of a gavel. They bought a baby. Danny said, 8 months ago, paid in cash, requested a newborn that could pass as theirs, fake birth certificate already prepared. He slid over a photo of a woman with auburn hair, shaking hands with David outside a law office. Miranda Torres, partner at Morrison Torres and Associates, specialist in family transition planning. Married to Michael Torres, my accountant. MT, the architect of my elimination. Danny's research turned darker. Miranda had helped at least 6 families accelerate inheritance through staged mental decline, suspicious accidents, and airtight legal cover. 12 deaths in 5 years, none proven murder, all suspicious. She called it compassionate intervention. I called it serial killing. They weren't just coming for me. They were running a system. That afternoon, I watched my own funeral from behind a maintenance shed with Jake's binoculars. A glossy coffin, expensive flowers, mourners dabbing their eyes while David and Vanessa played grieving airs. What struck me most were the missing faces. My lawyer, my accountant, my financial advisor, all linked to Torres. The crowd filed away, leaving my son and his wife smiling into condolences. They thought they'd buried me. They had no idea I was taking notes. By the time I was back at Mrs. Chen's, my path was clear. Stay dead, but haunt them. Use fear as leverage. At 11:47 a.m. the next day, while they met Miranda downtown, a courier delivered a note to their lawyer's office. On cream stationery, I had written, "Dear David and Vanessa, reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated. We need to talk. Love, Mom. P.S. Give my regards to little Robert Sarah. He's beautiful." Danny reported they bolted from the office within minutes, faces drained. Psychological warfare had begun. That same morning, I rang the bell of my old house. Carol Peterson, the nurse caring for the baby, opened the door in cartoon scrubs, bottle in hand. Her face went pale at the sight of me. "You're supposed to be dead." "So they tell me," I said. "May I come in?" Inside, the baby cooed in a bouncer, perfect and oblivious. "His name?" I asked. "They said Robert Jr., but they also just call him Baby Harrison." I told her the truth, that his mother was Sarah Collins, a 17-year-old runaway lured into surrogacy by Miranda Torres, dead from a complication no nurse believed. Carol's eyes filled with tears as she realized she was caring for an orphan, purchased like property. "What do you want me to do?" she whispered. "Document everything," I said, "and help me make sure this child grows up knowing the truth." Carol agreed, holding the baby closer as if she could shield him from the lies already written into his life. That afternoon, when David and Vanessa returned from their panic-stricken meeting, they walked into their Beacon Hill home and found me, sitting in my favorite armchair, a living ghost. "Hello, darlings," I said. "How was your morning?" Vanessa screamed. David froze with his keys still in hand. Carol entered, carrying the baby. "Mrs. Harrison asked me to bring your grandson," she said. I cradled the child and looked into Vanessa's eyes. "Tell me, dear, when exactly did you give birth?" Her silence was the answer. And then I laid the trap, spreading Danny's photographs across the coffee table. Meetings with Torres, cash surrogacy receipts, timelines of the Margaret Project. I pressed a recorder in my lap, capturing every stammer and denial. "This is evidence," I said calmly. "You have 24 hours to decide whether to confess or face prison." Their faces showed fear, but their eyes showed calculation. They would not choose confession. They would choose escalation. That night I didn't sleep. I kept playing their faces over in my mind. David's jaw twitching, Vanessa's knuckles white against the couch cushions. They weren't frightened children caught in a lie. They were predators cornered. And cornered predators don't surrender. They strike. By sunrise, Danny called. "They've moved money offshore." Cayman accounts. Fast. And Miranda booked them on a flight to Zurich next week. If they get there, it'll be harder to touch them. I looked at the baby asleep in the bassinet by Mrs. Chen's kitchen window. Innocent. A pawn in their scheme. Then we hit them before they run. Danny outlined the plan. Expose Miranda first. If the spider fell, the web would collapse. He traced 3 other inheritance accidents to her firm. One widow had drowned in her bathtub, despite no history of seizures. Another fell down her own cellar stairs 2 weeks after signing a new will. Danny had the files, the photos, and sworn statements from neighbors. What he needed was a whistleblower inside the Torres circle. That evening, Carol provided it. Hands trembling, she handed me a folder she'd hidden. Receipts for cash medical procedures, fake vaccination records, even a maternal discharge summary signed by a doctor who died 3 years prior. "They made me file it under Margaret Harrison's granddaughter," she whispered. But I knew. I knew it was wrong. With Danny's help, we photocopied everything and mailed duplicates to 3 journalists, 2 prosecutors, and 1 judge. Insurance. If anything happened to me again, the truth would scatter like broken glass. But I wanted more than exposure. I wanted them to feel what I had felt on that yacht. betrayed, helpless, sure death was only seconds away. So, I staged my own resurrection. The following Friday, David and Vanessa sat in a mahogany-paneled office with Miranda, discussing their next phase. Hidden speakers crackled to life, playing my voice. "Tell me, dear, when exactly did you give birth?" Vanessa went pale. On the desk, the surveillance photos began to slide out of an unmarked envelope, one by one, as if an invisible hand dealt their doom. Then the lights cut out. When they flickered back, I was standing in the doorway, alive, holding the baby. Danny had timed it perfectly. Miranda whispered, "Impossible." "No," I said, stepping into the room. "I am inevitable." The baby stirred, whimpering. Every eye was on me, and then I placed a tiny recorder on Miranda's desk. Red light blinking. "Say hello to the district attorney," I told them. The silence that followed was thick as rope. Miranda's mask cracked first. She reached for the folder of cash receipts, but Danny's hand stopped hers. David just stared, mouth dry, as if realizing the fortune he'd murdered for was slipping through his fingers. "And Vanessa," she whispered, "what do you want from us?" I smiled. "Justice." Miranda was the first to recover her composure. She leaned back in her chair, lips curling into a lawyer's smile. "Justice? You have no case, no birth certificate, no proof of fraud admissible in court. A few photos, some gossip. Nothing sticks, and if you press, I'll make sure you vanish again." Her arrogance was the opening I needed. I slid another envelope onto her desk. Inside were notarized statements from Carol, bank transfer screenshots Danny had traced, and the kicker, a death certificate for Dr. Harold Myers, the physician who'd supposedly signed Vanessa's maternity records. The room chilled as Miranda read it. "You forged the signature of a dead man," I said. "That's not inheritance law, Miranda. That's criminal conspiracy and fraud. I wonder how your partners at the Bar Association will react when they receive this package on Monday." Vanessa broke first, sobbing. "David, say something." But David just sat there, jaw tight, eyes darting between Miranda and me. He was calculating, as always. He'd spent his life trading loyalty for gain. "Mom," he finally said, voice strained, "we can fix this. If you just back off, take the beach house, take whatever you want, just don't ruin my life." I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "You already ruined mine when you tried to drown me." Danny pressed the recorder closer. "Confession would help your sentence," he said dryly. But Miranda wasn't done. She stood, smoothing her blazer. "You think you've trapped us? Number. I have judges on my call list, banks in my pocket, and a dozen families who will swear by my work. You walk out that door and your evidence disappears into red tape." That's when the second knock came. 2 men in dark suits entered, flashing badges. "U.S. Marshals," one said. "Ms. Torres, you're under arrest for fraud, racketeering, and conspiracy to commit homicide." Miranda froze. "Who?" Danny grinned. "Your partners aren't as loyal as you thought." One widow was waiting for someone brave enough to dig. She handed us everything. The marshals cuffed Miranda, reading her rights. She spat venom at David and Vanessa. "Fools! You brought me down with your incompetence." Then she was gone, heels clicking down the hall. Silence. David stood slowly, hands raised. "So, what now?" "Prison?" I looked at him, my son, my betrayer, and felt nothing but ash. "That depends," I said. "Do you confess, or do I let the courts dig it out of you?" Vanessa clutched his arm, whispering frantically. Finally, David sank back into his chair, defeated. "We'll talk," he muttered. Weeks later, headlines blared. Prominent attorney Miranda Torres arrested in surrogacy fraud ring. Vanessa cooperated for a lighter sentence, exposing every scheme. David resisted until the end, but the recording sealed his fate. And me? I didn't return to Beacon Hill. I stayed with Mrs. Chen, rocking little Robert Sarah in the evenings. He gurgled, tiny fists waving, untouched by the crimes of the adults who bought him. One night, as the baby drifted to sleep, Jake asked, "Do you ever regret not letting them believe you were dead?" I kissed the child's forehead. No, the dead can't protect the living. But the living? The living can fight back. Months passed, but the storm never fully quieted. David was sentenced to 12 years, fraud, conspiracy, attempted murder. Vanessa, reduced to a pale shadow of herself, took a plea deal. 3 years in mandatory testimony. Miranda Torres, she'll likely never see daylight again. Racketeering stuck, and whispers said she'd cut a deal to save her own skin by naming names far bigger than mine. But victory is never clean. My name was dragged through papers, my grief dissected on talk shows. Some called me resilient, others accused me of staging it all for attention. The truth was simpler. I'd survived because I refused to vanish, and yet not everything was loss. Robert Sarah, tiny, blinking unknowing, became the quiet reason I rose each morning. Carol and I took turns caring for him, his soft cries echoing through Mrs. Chen's house like a promise of a future unsullied by greed. I didn't know yet if I'd legally keep him or if the state would intervene, but in my heart he was already mine. One evening, sitting on the porch as the sun painted the horizon gold, Jake leaned against the railing. "So, what now? Retire? Move? Start over?" I smiled faintly, eyes on the baby in my arms. "I already have. This is my second life, and this time I'm not living it for money or for people who see me as a stepping stone. I'm living it for truth. And for him." The world had tried to write me off, to drown me, to bury me in silence and forge signatures. But here I sat, alive, holding the future against my chest. And if I learned anything, it's this: the most dangerous thing you can do to a woman they thought was finished is let her live.